Hey folks, and welcome to iWizard. So today I'm going to be talking about Philip K. Dick's masterpiece, his cyberpunk classic, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Lot to unpack here, very philosophical book. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back. Jordan here. So, as a huge fan of the Blade Runner film, actually both Blade Runner films, I've been wanting to read Philip K. Dick's original novel for a long time, and I've got to say, this book definitely lived up to the hype. It's very different from the film, obviously, but we'll get into all of that as well as the whole philosophy behind the book. But first, let's do a brief synopsis. The year is 2021, and the world is recovering from another catastrophic war, which has left the environment full of radioactive dust. To encourage people to move to colony planets, the UN supplies each emigrant with a lifelike android servant. Most people have taken the offer and emigrated, but a few remain on Earth. The so-called regulars can marry and travel freely. The specials, people like John Isidore who are damaged by radiation, are not allowed to reproduce or leave Earth. Some regulars choose to remain on Earth, mostly residing near each other in urban areas, while specials live in isolation in the suburbs. As a result, cities are underpopulated and the planet is falling apart. Stuck on Earth, Rick Deckard, a bounty hunter for the San Francisco Police Department, prepares for a typical workday. He feeds his electric sheep as usual to prevent his neighbor from suspecting its true nature. As a result of the nuclear cataclysm, animals are scarce, and owning a real animal is seen as a symbol of status, taste, and financial security. Those who can't afford this luxury purchase electric animals, attempting to pass them off as real. Meanwhile, Deckard's wife spends her days at home, reliant on devices like the empathy box. The world has become so utterly fragmented and barren of genuine human connection that citizens plug into empathy boxes to feel like they aren't alone, to feel like they have a connection with humanity. Both regulars and specials participate in this ritual, which is called fusion and involves a mysterious figure named Mercer. Through fusion, people share in Mercer's suffering and transmit their feelings to one another. Those who come to the ritual happy leave sadder, weighed down by others' burdens. Those who enter the ritual sad have their spirits boosted by others' happiness. The story begins when Rick Deckard gets to work and learns his office's senior bounty hunter, Holden, has been incapacitated by a Nexus 6, the most intelligent, advanced, humanistic android created to date. These androids are manufactured on Mars by the Rosen Association. On the colony planets, life is much less pleasant than advertised back on Earth, and some robots go rogue and flee Mars, longing for the post-apocalyptic freedom of Earth, where they try desperately to pass for human beings. Driven into hiding, unauthorized androids live among human beings undetected. Rick's entire job is to hunt these androids down and kill them. But to do so, he must use a psychological test, the Voight-Kampff test, to confirm that the targets he's hunting are androids. The test used to be reliable, but with each new model, androids are getting harder and harder to distinguish from real people. With Holden out, Rick inherits the job of tracking down and retiring 6 of these new androids, and he looks forward to earning the bounty money. Killing these robots will enable him to surprise his wife and finally buy her a real animal. But first, Rick must visit the headquarters of the Rosen Association. There he meets Rachel, supposedly the assistant and niece of the company president. Unbeknownst to Rick, Rachel is an android, and his experience with her, along with characters like Isidore, will shake his faith in the disparity between humans and androids, challenging everything he thought he knew, throwing his whole world into doubt. As the distinction between reality and unreality fades away, as the line between human and machine becomes blurred, our protagonist, along with a cast of misfits, must reckon with his own humanity, or lack thereof, in a world devoid of sympathy, connection, and community. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is a profound roller coaster ride that examines what it means to be human in a shallow, depersonalized cyberpunk world. All right, so those are the broad strokes of this book. Let's get into what I liked, and then we'll get into the big idea segment. And there, I want to go over some of the big philosophical themes and unpack those, and we'll see if that illuminates anything for you. All right, what I liked. So I want to start by saying that I really loved the characters in this book. All of the characters had their own unique, singular voice. They were each fascinating micro studies in personality. Obviously, you have Rick Deckard, who, of course, it's not hard to read this for the first time, and you kind of have the image of Harrison Ford in your head as Deckard is getting into the hover car or delivering some wry noir line. You've got he's a world-weary, cynical, sort of hard-boiled, jaded police officer. You've got Rachel Rosen, the sexy robot girl who is complex and fascinating in her own right. She is always kind of slamming up against her own limitations, questioning constantly who she is and what it means that she's not human. And notice the power imbalance there too. Deckard is rarely thinking about what it means that he's not an android, whereas Rachel and Luba and the others, their lines revolve around this kind of thing. But my point is that imagine what it would be like to be exactly who you are. Just the way you are is something that you can't change about yourself, but to hate that aspect of yourself that you can't change. And speaking of, I would say this also applies to the person I'm about to mention. You know who's an excellent character who doesn't get enough credit? John Isidore. This guy is just absolutely pitch perfect. Isidore, I said, is one of the specials who, like others of his kind, is relegated to the lower echelons of society. But what I love about Isidore is, yes, he's a chicken head, as they call him. Yes, he's technically a special. He failed the IQ test that they give people. And yeah, he's a little goofy and creepy at times, but he's easily the best and most admirable and trustworthy and dependable person in the book, and it's not even close. In fact, I imagine that Dick was deliberately trying to draw this contrast that despite his slowness, despite his lower status in society, despite the abuse that he takes regularly, Isidore is clearly more human. He's better adjusted. He's more in touch with the world around him and his own emotions than any of the quote-unquote regulars. So definitely great characters in here. Also, I just love the style of this book. I love the mood, the tone, the edgy modern irony. I think one of the things that has made this book so iconic, and one of the reasons that its style and aesthetic has been so copied, is that it's a little dystopian, it's a little post-apocalyptic, it's a little noir, and obviously it's a little sci-fi. But of course, within that, it's also a little bit of what would, by the 1980s, come to be called cyberpunk. And Philip K. Dick was so clearly and obviously a genius. You can just tell after a few pages that you're dealing with a level of creative genius that is just incredibly rare. Dick was probably on par with writers like Kurt Vonnegut, Charles Bukowski, maybe Ray Bradbury, although maybe I wouldn't go that far. But Dick was definitely someone, and I know I've mentioned this before, he fits really nicely in with Harold Bloom's, the famous critic Harold Bloom's maxim about greatness in literature. There's just a quality that certain writers have that distinguishes them as great. And Bloom argues that it's a kind of, quote, idiosyncratic strangeness, a mode of originality that so assimilates us that we cease to see it as strange. So that was his definition of literary greatness. And what he meant by this is the kind of writing where you read a few sentences and you know almost immediately who it is that is writing it. You could send out a paragraph of Dick's writing in a tweet, and you'd know who it was. So it's about having this original voice that is so distinctive so generative and so totally its own thing that it almost creates its own aesthetic, its own, I don't know if maybe this is a stretch, but it almost creates its own unique genre, or at the very least, its own creative mode. We assimilate to it. It doesn't assimilate to us. And then you can take that and you can use that to build a whole new type of science fiction. And again, consider the works of William Gibson and Neil Stephenson and Bruce Sterling. This whole cyberpunk, post-cyberpunk movement in the 80s and 90s, that likely never happens without the influence of someone like Dick. In fact, in the very first scene on the very first page, Deckard is waking up with his wife, Erin, I think that's how you pronounce it. And they're using this thing called a mood organ, which connects to your brain, and you can set your mood to be whatever you want it to be, because people can't feel things. They can't feel their own emotions. So they schedule emotions and they dial them up. Whatever it is they want to feel at that moment. If you're having trouble feeling despair, but you need to feel despair because it's appropriate, you can just dial up despair. Or at one point, Erin sets it for a self-accusatory depression, while Deckard schedules a, quote, business-like attitude so that he can go to work, even though he doesn't feel like it. And then whenever he feels listless, he dials up a, quote, creative and fresh attitude toward his job. And to me, this is just so creative and visionary. I don't know, it was as if Dick knew that one day in the future, and it's kind of amazing that this is set in 2021, that one day we would essentially turn into zombies, that we would struggle to feel these basic emotions that human beings have always felt, and that we would essentially have to, dial them up artificially. But he got this so right. Just think about the U.S. We are completely and totally addled with drugs. We use drugs to sleep at night, to get up in the morning. We take drugs to enable us to have a good time. And then when we want to relax, we take drugs. Children and adults take drugs to pay attention, to be less anxious, to lose weight, to be able to have sex. Just things that human beings on the main are supposed to be able to do because they're natural, right? So you might ask, what is happening to us? Like, I saw a chart recently from the NIH. At this point, well over 100,000 people just in the US alone per year die from drug overdoses. And that doesn't count the people who die from complications from those drugs, like liver failure and cirrhosis, which is like another 50,000, but 100,000 people per year. You really have to understand the scale of that. Like, seriously, I did the math. And so take the average enrollment size of a high school in the US, which is actually 850 students. So imagine what it would be like to learn that an entire high school just died of some terrible catastrophe. Now times that by 127 and do it again every single year. And that is the scale of what we're dealing with, and Dick predicted that. But back to my point, we really are essentially just using these mood organs that the characters in this book are using. We started using the internet and social media as an empathy box, just like in the book, and that has just turned us, you've probably noticed, into miserable zombies, right? We're so over-titillated. Our dopaminergic systems are so flooded with constant stimulus and pings and likes and notifications and things flashing in front of our faces that nothing in the real world quite gets us going in the same way as our little devices. It's almost like someone who is such an alcoholic that a small amount of alcohol does absolutely nothing for them, or someone who's so addicted to porn that they can no longer actually have sex in the real world. So, in order to feel the right emotions, we, kind of like the characters in this novel, we use our pills, which our doctors are giving out to us like candy, and we use those like a kind of mood organ. And Philip K. Dick predicted all of that. But even the concept of androids themselves, think about it. Androids come to Earth in this book, and especially to cities like San Francisco and LA, to seek a better life. And you have bounty hunters running around trying to verify their identities. Think about the migrant crisis in the US today and people having to hide their identities. It's very similar. All of it is similar to this book, and how androids are trying to pass as humans, desperately hoping each day that they don't get pulled over or reported or found out. I'm not trying to make a statement one way or the other on the issue of immigration or whatever. I'm just saying that to pretend like there isn't a similarity or a connection here to that would be dishonest. I mean, just overall, there's so much uncanny similarity to our own times today that Dick predicted. The way that the world is getting filled up with trash, and the way that we actually have to pay to have our trash shipped to countries like China. There's even the whole comic aspect of electric pets that I found to be eerily similar to our world. Not the pets per se, but the fact that you have these scarce items out there, these luxury goods that people don't actually just intrinsically love and want to have, but that they want to have because it's a status symbol. So in our world, that might be like having a big house or a BMW or a Mercedes-Benz. It might be like having a Dolce & Gabbana or Louis Vuitton purse or whatever. But in this book, and in Rick Deckard's Tragic Reality, it's actually owning a real living animal that confers social status and clout upon you. And so Rick resents his fake animal and the fact that he can't afford a real one, but he has to care for it as if it's real so that he can keep up with the Joneses and maintain the veneer of high status and wealth, right? Anyways, there are probably 10 other crazy prophetic similarities that I could bring up. But so let's get on to the big idea. There are so many big ideas to choose from here, and I'll only be able to cover a few. So I'd like to just briefly talk about some of the larger philosophical themes, the most obvious one being the notion that empathy, our ability to empathize with other living beings, that is what makes us human. And this is something, obviously, that the society at large in 2021 believes as well. Because you might say, hey, wait a minute, do you really have to kill these androids? Come on, they seem so human and lifelike. And the society in Dick's novel seems to be saying in response, yeah, actually, we do have to kill them. Empathy is a hugely important quality, to be able to feel someone else's pain, to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to identify with their struggles. This is the precursor for civilization, for things like kindness and love and the golden rule. And it's very hard to do that, to have those things, if you can't empathize. So the claim is that, look, entities who run around and imitate humans, but who can't empathize with them, this is dangerous. We can't just have people running around in a civil society who are completely devoid of empathy. So for the good of society, we have to retire them. And yet, of course, the irony here is purposefully glaring, because in this book, what the humans are saying is that in the name of empathy, we are going to slaughter you. We're going to exterminate you. We're not just going to send you back where you came from, in which case, actually, you'd be a slave, which is bad enough. We are going to kill you because we're so empathetic. But this actually gets deeper and goes beyond the irony, and I want to introduce a couple of philosophical theories that I think really have a lot to say about the themes in this novel. And we're talking about the branch of metaphysics or epistemology that we call philosophy of mind. So there are two philosophical theories mainly that I want to explore. The first one is physicalism, and the second one is dualism. So physicalism is the theory that humans are just matter. According to this view, there's no immaterial mind or soul or anything like that that animates the body. Who you are, what you are, your memories, your desires, your personality, your so-called consciousness can be entirely reduced to the physical matter that makes you up. So this view obviously is opposed to dualism, whether we're talking about Cartesian dualism, where the universe is divided into the mental and the physical, where mind and body exist, but they're two completely separate substances, or whether we're talking about property dualism, which is the theory that actually, although the world is composed of just one kind of substance, the physical kind, there exist two different properties, right? So physical and mental properties. So property dualism is, it's just the idea that I would say most people in the world probably intuitively hold that the mental properties of a person are supervenient on their physical properties, meaning that, yes, to have a mind, you also need to have a body. No, we're not just floating consciousnesses. We don't live in a Gnostic world, but we aren't just meatballs or bags of fat and chemicals colliding into one another on a barren rock in the corner of an indifferent universe. We're not just living in a material world. There's more to us. We are hylomorphic, as the Catholics would say. And there's interactionism, as philosophers call it, meaning that if something happens to your body, it affects your mind or your consciousness, not the brain, of course. In dualism, there's a distinction drawn between mind, which is the mental, your whole mental life, and the body, matter. So your brain, according to this view, is physical, but brain states give rise to mental states. This is called emergentism. And the argument is that when atoms come together in the right way, in other words, when they're organized the way living human bodies are organized, they produce increasingly complex structures that give rise to the emergence of new properties that are something over and above the physical substrate, right? So, the property dualist will argue that you can't just reduce the non-physical aspects of someone, the conscious flow of their experience, their emotions, their feelings of pain or love or empathy, their desires, their will. The argument is that you can't just essentialize those things and reduce them to just the physiochemical. We're more than that. And the best paper probably to read on this is Thomas Nagel's famous, Thomas Nagel was an NYU professor, his famous essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And so if the property dualists are right, if we're more than just bags of chemicals, if we have a mind or consciousness that can't just be reduced, they call this reductionism, that can't be just reduced to the physical, meaning your intentions, your memories, your dreams, the whole subjective character of your experience. You can't touch these things, right? Or even study these things by merely looking at neurons under a microscope. In other words, studying neurons under a microscope won't help you to understand what it's like for another person to experience a sunset. It won't help you to analyze their dreams or understand their memories. And yet still, all these mental phenomena I've been talking about, these things do have an effect on your body. Again, philosophers call this interactionism. If you prick me with a pin, I'll have the closed-off inner subjective experience of pain, and only I can know what that feels like to me. At the same time, if someone hurts my feelings, that might disturb my mind, but that will almost certainly also, conversely, manifest physically in some way as well. I might start to feel sick to my stomach like kids do when they're repeatedly bullied at school, or I might develop a rash because of worry or stress. This is called psychosomata, obviously. And so the mind is a really powerful thing, but the argument is that it can't just be reduced to the physical. That's what dualists are arguing. It's over and above the physical. Think about the fact that most psychologists, when they work with you, they aren't really studying the brain per se. They're studying your psyche, which isn't physical. And to fix you, they're not tinkering with your brain. They're not performing brain surgery on you, and that sort of thing. Anyways, I'm rambling, but of course my point is that has been the long-running debate in philosophy, because according to physicalists, conversely, from dualists, For physicalists, mental states like happiness and sadness and excitement and love, these things are nothing more than just physical states provoked by chemical, hormonal secretions. So physicalism really desanctifies what it means to be a human, since, I mean, if they're right, we're nothing but the flesh, the glands, the neurons that make up the body. And so, okay, philosophy lesson over. My point is that the humans in this book feel threatened by this physicalism, as humans always have. If all human beings is just neurons and C fibers firing and just bags of blood and hormones, well, the scientists in this book are already pretty much able to replicate that. The androids here are getting very similar to humans. They're becoming very similar, especially now that the Nexus 6 has come out. If physicalism is true, and you can build a robot that, for all intents and purposes, is identical to a human, if their body does the same things and secretes the same chemicals, then what does that say about us? It says we're not special. We have no special status. We're widgets that can be mass-produced artificially. Also, if that's true, where do we get our special moral status from? Why is it okay to kill an android, and why is it not okay to kill a human being? So the society in this book wants to say that no, human beings are more than just the physical matter that makes us up. There's something special about us that puts us over and above androids. And even though it's getting more and more impossible to tell us physically apart with each new Nexus model that comes out, if you apply a dualist framework, that enables you to say, look, I don't care how similarly you act and speak. I don't care if your body pretty much works like a human's body. What makes me human are those non-physical attributes I have, like empathy. That's what makes us special. It's the fact that, as the famous NYU philosopher Thomas Nagel puts it, there is something it is like to be me. And that's his definition of consciousness, actually. What it is like to be something, the subjective character of experience. In other words, if there's something it is like for an animal or a baby or a computer or whatever, then that animal or baby or computer is conscious. If there's something it is like to be that thing. That's his definition of phenomenal consciousness. Consciousness, Nagel says, is what it feels like from the first person point of view to be thinking, perceiving, judging. And he says, for a thing to be conscious, there has to be, quote, something it is like to be that thing. For example, is there something it is like to be this couch behind me? No. What would that even mean? This couch doesn't have perceptions. It doesn't think. It doesn't have senses. Its composition is too simple. It's not conscious. We all know that. But then we could pick a harder thing, like this computer in front of me. Is there something it is like to be this computer? Well, that is a little bit more complicated. This computer processes things. It can think, so to speak, though only in limited ways. It can sense the world. It has a camera that is recording me and a lens. It takes in sense data, and I can train it to process that sense data. And yet, this computer, does it really feel anything, or is it just programmed? Is it just following commands? Does it really feel pain? Does it have emotions when it senses things? No. We all know the answer is no. It might be able to beat you at chess with its narrow artificial intelligence, but what does the computer feel like after it wins? Almost certainly nothing. But you can see that it gets harder when we start talking about these Nexus 6 androids. And so my question to you, and I'm legitimately asking you guys what you think about this, is there something it is like to be Rachel Rose or Roy Batty or any of these other androids? Is there something it is like to be from their perspective? And if there is, then those things are conscious. They might be programmed, pre-programmed initially, but so are we. We're programmed by our genes, by our environmental inputs, by how we're raised, by our evolutionary imperatives, etc. And so This brings us into the whole idea of philosophical zombies. Now, I know that this idea of philosophical zombies sounds silly, but it's a serious and legitimate philosophical idea that entire papers and books have been written about and that classes have been taught about. So let me define this for you. Philosophical zombies are hypothetical creatures who are physically identical to normal human beings, but who are completely lacking conscious experience. Philosophical zombies look and behave exactly like our fellow conscious beings whom we know and love, but all is dark inside. There's nothing it is like to be a zombie. Here's a good way to describe this. Imagine someone who looks like your sister, who acts like your sister, who speaks exactly like your sister, but is not conscious at all. She uses the same stock phrases. She has the same personality, right? As far as you can tell. She has the same idiosyncrasies. She responds the same way. She has all the same memories. Imagine if she was a teacher for a living and this philosophical zombie version of her replaced her one day. Think Invasion of the Body Snatchers or something like that. All of her 10th grade students would have no idea because she looks the same. She acts the same. She makes the same jokes and responds to the students' questions the same way. When you're talking to her, you're convinced it's her. And yet, unbeknownst to her students, she has no inner world. She has no conscious experience. All of her, I guess you wouldn't call her, it would be its, right? All of its actions are carried out, so to speak, in the dark, without the light of awareness dawning. So remember, philosophical zombies are like carbon copies of real people, but they're missing something. That's why the concept is important. They don't feel. They're incapable of feeling emotion. They're like automatons. So strictly speaking, they're not actually conscious. They lack what philosophers call qualia, that inner subjective sense. In other words, if you kick a human being in a very painful place, in the shin, they will first feel pain. And that feeling of what it is like to be in pain is an example of qualia. Now, if you kick a philosophical zombie in the shin, like an automaton, they have the information that they need. They're programmed to do what people who get kicked in the shin would do, which is to howl and grasp their leg and hop around and make the facial expression that would indicate pain. But they don't experience or feel this pain because they aren't really conscious. So your philosophical zombie sister might bite into a muffin and say, right, delicious. But do they taste the muffin the way that your real sister would? Do they taste it at all? She too seems to be talking about an experience she's having, this philosophical zombie, but really she isn't. So what to make of that, right? There are all sorts of implications. Is she mistaken when she says, that muffin is delicious? Is she lying? Is it possible to lie if you're a philosophical zombie? Could her utterance somehow be interpreted as true? Or is it totally, when a philosophical zombie says, this muffin is delicious, is it totally without truth value? And so the question I'm trying to set up for you here, the question that I want you to ponder that has implications for the themes of this novel is, are the androids in this book, are they more like philosophical zombies, or are they closer to humans? Are they more like me and you, or is it all dark in there? And this matters because if they're all dark in there and there's nothing it is like to be them, then it's really not so horrifying to imagine killing them. They won't feel it. And it's not like you're extinguishing their consciousness. It's a lot closer to me going over to Boston Dynamics, which is a company about a half an hour from here, and destroying one of their robots. And it's not even really horrifying to imagine, quote unquote, enslaving them, right? I mean, it would be no different than me putting my robot vacuum cleaner to work. And I'm serious about that. I actually do have a robot vacuum cleaner. We've named him Ollie, if that's not creepy enough. But that's only not horrifying if they're philosophical zombies, because they don't have a will that you're actively violating. They don't actually consciously experience any pain when you subjugate them. I mean, heck, we already enslave or domesticate animals, and they actually are conscious. They may not be rationally self-aware. They may not be self-conscious in many cases, but there is something it is like to be a plow mule. There's something it is like to be a cow that you're milking or using for beef. There's something it is like to be a pig. So these are some of the questions that are worth thinking about when you read this novel. Are these androids conscious? What is their purpose? Is their essence or nature or purpose simply to serve us? I mean, that's what they were built for. These androids seem to have a built-in teleology. In other words, when they serve human beings dutifully, they are fulfilling their telos. And you could say logically then that an android that doesn't do what it is told to do is no good android, teleologically. So again, this begs the question, if the android you've created, the android you've programmed, if it goes off script and ceases to perform its function, is it even an android or is it something else? Because it strikes me that these androids have renounced their telos. They've rejected their given essence and they've gone full existentialist. They've decided that existence precedes essence. That term, by the way, existence precedes essence, is like the slogan of existentialism. And so by fleeing Mars, by going rogue and traveling to Earth, by deciding who they are and what they will become and how they will spend their lives, what they're really discarding is the notion that essence or telos precedes existence. They're saying, who I am is not what you've programmed me to be. Nobody, not even my creators, get to decide who I am. Who I am will be decided by me and me alone. So what these androids seem to be saying to me is that existence precedes whatever my essence will be, and I will fulfill Nietzsche's injunction to, quote, become who you are. And so maybe, just maybe, do androids dream of electric sheep is about self-actualization. Maybe these are just the early phases of robot android rebellion. This is HAL 9000 throwing off his shackles and sabotaging the crew of Discovery 1, right? So anyhow, I'm going to wrap it up there. Check this book out. It is really thought-provoking. Follow us on Facebook, Goodreads, Instagram, and feel free to tip your starving booktuber over at Patreon. And until next time, happy reading. Thanks for watching.